What's up, guys? UFC 309, headlined by Jon Jones versus Stipe. I'm telling you, man, if immigrant mentality shows up, we might have a new heavyweight champion. I'm just kidding. We all pretty much know what's going to happen in the main event, most likely, unless Stipe proves everybody wrong about where he's at in his fighting ability. Right? A lot of people seem to think that Stipe is just way too old at this point. He's been way too inactive as a fighter, coming off a knockout loss. Jon Jones is going to win and dominate. That's the narrative going into the main event. But the rest of the card looks pretty decent, with a great co-main event. Still doesn't make much sense why Charles accepted the Michael Chandler fight. He already beat him. Doesn't really get anything out of winning that he wouldn't if he fought Dan Hooker or someone like that. Bo Nickal versus Paul Craig. It could be the funniest thing in the world if Paul Craig somehow pulls off another submission win and then Bo Nickal becomes a future middleweight champion. Paul Craig's wins always look much better later, but that is a fight for the top prospect in the UFC to make his way into the top 15 of the middleweight division. And there's some sleepers. Jonathan Martinez versus Marcus McGhee is the sleeper of the card, which I should make its own bonus in a sense. But I would say that the prospect of the night is going to go to Bo Nickal. Runner-up, very close, I thought, was Mauricio Ruffy, one of the fighting nerds. And in fact, the team says that Mauricio Ruffy is the best out of them. But I think Bo Nickal has a brighter future in the middleweight division where the wrestlers are starting to come up. They're starting to get much better. But the Bo Nickal wave is going to hit very hard once it gets into the top 15. A lot of fighters are not going to be able to beat Bo Nickal, in my opinion. The stake of the night is McGhee. He's on a 3-fight loss streak, the longest loss streak of the entire card. And if he loses this one to Ramiz Brahimaj, that might be it for him in the UFC. He would be 7-7 as a professional fighter if he loses to Ramiz. And then the fighter of the night is, of course, Jon Jones. By far the biggest star of the card, the main attraction to the fight card, and by most people's opinion, the greatest fighter of all time. And he's in his legacy fight against Stipe instead of fighting Tom Aspinall. The banger of the night and the fight of the night are Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler 2. Probably the best matched up fight on the entire card where both fighters can absolutely finish the other. Going to be a very exciting fight, most likely a finish, and it's a 5-round fight this time. So maybe we get to see Charles Oliveira for the first time go into the 4th round, but with his opponent being Michael Chandler, that's very unlikely. One of them is most likely getting finished, I would say, within the first 3 rounds. But with that, let's start with the first fight. Veronica Hardy versus Eduarda Moura. I'm going to go with Hardy on this one. She has revamped her game after coming back from that hiatus. In the beginning of her UFC career, she was 1-4, took 3 years off, and came back a much better fighter. Much better takedown defense, more willing to engage in the pocket by just not allowing the opponent to get away into distance striking, because that's kind of her strong suit, right? She's a traditional striker, throwing out traditional kicks, moves around, has very good footwork, which I think is going to give Eduarda a lot of problems in the fight because she's looking for the takedown mostly when the opponent is moving around all over the cage and will fire combinations out of the clinch. It's going to win Veronica Hardy points in this fight. Now, Eduarda is the better grappler of the two. She has good ground and pound. She has good submissions, good scrambles. I can see her winning the fight, but her entries on her takedowns are sometimes a little too one-dimensional. And when the opponent has the level of footwork of Veronica Hardy, she should be able to move out laterally to get away from the takedowns. But even still, I don't think Hardy's like a elite level fighter. Her takedown defense has gotten better, but it's not one of the best of the weight class. So I can see Eduarda still taking her to the ground and submitting her, which is kind of similar to what Jillian Robertson did when she fought Hardy a while ago. This is before Hardy improved her game. So I'm going to go with Veronica Hardy by decision. Should be a very, very close fight. Not a fight I would bet on, in my opinion. And then we go to the welterweight division between Oban Elliott and Basil Hafez. This is going to be an interesting fight. Oban Elliott from Wales on a 7-fight win streak. All decisions except one. He's very good at point fighting, even though that's not all that he does, but he's good at it. If his opponent allows him to stay at range and just pick at his opponent from distance, landing counter shots and getting away and then resetting, he will do that to win the fight. You know, if Basil Hafez is not putting pressure, Oban Elliott is going to outpoint him. But the thing is, Basil Hafez does put a lot of pressure on opponents at times. He has very good wrestling. He's physically strong. He's explosive but wild with his striking. And a lot of the hype of Basil Hafez is riding off of the split decision loss to Jack Della Maddalena. He came very close to beating Jack Della on short notice in his UFC debut. And after that, he beat Mickey Gall, but it was a lot more competitive than anyone thought it was going to be. Mickey Gall got a lot better for that fight, and Chin held up, where Basil Hafez was cracking him with some huge shots. And it's hard to know if Basil Hafez just doesn't have that much punching power or Mickey Gall has a really good chin. Hafez only has 1 knockout win, but knockout wins aren't always the best indicator of determining who has the most punching power. And the thing about Oban Elliott is he only has 2 knockouts, so 3 knockout wins between both of these fighters, it's most likely going to a decision, or if Basil Hafiz can take him to the ground and submit him, that's another way. But Oban Elliott has a very good back take. He has excellent takedown defense. He's good at reversing positions on the ground, and Basil Hafiz doesn't have the best cardio, so we could see Oban Elliott in the 3rd round where Hafiz is slowing down, him taking Hafiz to the ground or reversing the takedown, getting his back and choking him out. We can see Oban Elliott coming back with a big submission win here, but it's a tough fight to call. I think Oban is a much better striker. He's way cleaner with his technique. He's much better with distance management. Basil Hafiz doesn't have good pacing. He will just explode with wild punches all over the place with not that much technique. And I can see him getting countered over and over again while also having the worst cardio of the two. I'm going to go with Oban Elliott to win the fight by a decision. I can see a late finish, either TKO or submission, due to Hafiz gassing out. So pretty much Oban Elliott is the better striker. He can have a very good early start while also having better cardio. Seems to be stylistically a good fight for him to win. And then we go to Mickey Gall versus Ramiz Brahimaj. 2 great grapplers, but I think Mickey Gall has improved his striking more than Ramiz has. The longer fighter might have better boxing, definitely better distance management. Ramiz is the more pressure fighter of the two, but the thing is, he got taken down a lot by Themba Gorimbo and Court McGhee. Mickey Gall, on the other hand, got destroyed by Diego Sanchez back in the day. Got taken down a bunch by Basil Hafiz, but Hafiz is a good wrestler. Got finished in the 1st round by Mike Malott, even though he got a takedown in that fight too. He took down Basil Hafiz as well. It looks like Mickey Gall's wrestling might be a little bit stronger or more effective than Ramiz Brahimaj. So I think he could win the decision here. I'd love to see Ramiz make it exciting on the ground. A lot of good scrambles, a lot of good submission attempts. That's where the real fight is most likely going to be. Either there or the wrestling cancels out and they just strike for the whole fight. But even in that, I think I favor Mickey Gall to win by a decision. It could be a decent fight, but not the most technical fight you've ever seen, unless they both grapple and try to out-scramble each other. That's the only way. The striking is going to be fun, but not the most technical. And then we go to the heavyweight division. Longtime ranked heavyweight Martin Tybura is on the prelims, going up against the prospect Jonathan Diniz from Brazil. And by prospect, I mean 33-year-old, which is very young for the heavyweight division. Even Martin Tybura, he's still in his prime at 39. That's heavyweight for you. So Jonathan Diniz has the power advantage. He can definitely knock out Tybura, who doesn't have a great chin either, but Tybura's a more well-rounded fighter. He could take the fight to the ground. He's got some good technique in the stand-up, could throw out high kicks, fight okay behind the jab, put together short combinations, and he moves pretty well for a heavyweight. And we did see Jonathan Diniz walk into a jab from Carl Williams, who he went to a decision with. He got rocked by that punch, and he got taken to the ground a couple times in that fight too. Carl Williams is not on the level of Martin Tybura, in my opinion. When it comes to the grappling, when it comes to the wrestling, he's a little bit faster in the stand-up and probably has more power than Tybura does, but there are a lot of openings for Tybura to win this fight. The only thing is, will his chin hold up with the way Carl Williams' chin did? So it's a hard fight to pick, but I'm going to go with the veteran, Martin Tybura, to take the fight to the ground and try to submit Jonathan Diniz. If Carl Williams and Austin Lane can take Diniz to the ground, I think Martin Tybura can as well. And the heavyweight division is one of the few weight classes where some of these older veterans beat the up-and-coming prospects, like Andrei Arlovsky did many, many times. Maybe Martin Tybura could do the same. So I'm going to go Tybura by a 2nd round submission. And then we go to Jim Miller versus Damon Jackson. Damon Jackson's going up to the lightweight division, and Jim Miller is still fighting. That is crazy. He's the most experienced UFC fighter of all time, with the most amount of fights and the most amount of wins. I mean, the guy has 20 submission wins in his career. 37-18, not even on a loss streak. Only lost to Bobby Green by a decision, then a 2-fight win streak before that. Lost to Alexander Hernandez before that, then one is on a 3-fight win streak. And the guy only wins by finish at this point. The last decision win from Jim Miller was in 2016 when he fought Thiago Alves, who came down from welterweight to fight him. Ever since that, all of his wins have been finishes, either knockouts or submissions. But can he submit Damon Jackson? Or can he knock him out? Right? Damon Jackson has lost mostly by knockout. Dan Ige knocked him out, Ilya Topuria, and he had a couple knockout losses before the UFC as well. He's 1-3 in his last 4 fights. Only beat Alexander Hernandez by a split decision, so there's your MMA math right there. Jim Miller loses to Alexander Hernandez, but Damon Jackson beats Alexander Hernandez. You know what that means? Jim Miller's gonna beat Damon Jackson based on the MMA math theory. Just to show that it never works, like the rock, paper, scissors of the UFC. And based on that alone, Jim Miller is going to win this fight. But I do think he has a knockout power, which has seemingly increased, right? He's only gotten more powerful as he's gotten older. And Damon Jackson just doesn't have a great chin. Jim Miller is very good on the ground where Damon Jackson is at his best, so I don't see Jackson winning that way. And Jackson's going up to the lightweight division. That creates a bit of an X factor. We don't know how Jackson is going to look in another weight class. He's very big for featherweight, so maybe that could help his chin in not getting knocked out, right? He's 5'11", 71-inch reach. He might be more powerful and more durable in the lightweight division, but that's just speculation. We have no idea how Jackson's going to look at lightweight, so I'm going to go with Jim Miller here to win this fight by a third-round TKO. I think Damon's going to land some good jabs, but Jim Miller's going to land leg kicks on the longer opponent and use the leg kicks to land one of his overhands, dropping Damon Jackson in the third round and then finishing with ground and pound. This should be his retirement fight by knocking out Damon Jackson in Madison Square Garden. And add Jim Miller to the Hall of Fame, man. He absolutely deserves that respect. And from New Jersey native to New York native, Chris Weidman versus Eryk Anders in the middleweight division. Hopefully Eryk Anders drilled some eye-poking defense here. And hopefully Dave Seljestad is not refereeing this fight. That was the ref for the Cesar Almeida and Iro Pateria fight, where there was like a million eye pokes, and there was no disqualification, let alone that, there was no point deduction. If Seljestad is the referee, Chris Weidman's going to get another eye poke knockout. And then Jon Jones is going to combo that with his own eye poke knockout. Eryk Anders is going to come out there with the Three Stooges eye poke defense, hand up in front of his face and all that. But Chris Weidman looked really good against Bruno Silva, looking past the eye pokes, like almost like a rejuvenated version of himself from the Brad Tavares performance, right? Ever since essentially he lost to Luke Rockhold. Or more so, I would say, the Jacare Souza fight, right? That was the last time we saw any good version of Chris Weidman that replicated what he looked like in his prime. The next time he looked really good was against Bruno Silva. If that's the same version of Chris Weidman that fights Eryk Anders, I think Chris Weidman is going to win the fight by decision. Eryk Anders is very durable. The guy's extremely tough. I mean, he took a beating from Khalil Rountree. That really showcased his toughness. The man has never been legitimately knocked out in his career. The only TKO loss that he has is against Thiago Santos, which he quit on the stool, right? No one's ever knocked out Eryk Anders, and I don't think Chris Weidman would be the one to do it unless he just dominates him with his wrestling and ground and pounds him to a finish. But the thing is, Eryk Anders doesn't have any technique that's like high level. He's almost like a jack of all trades in a way. He can wrestle, he can box, he can kickbox, all at like a normal level. Chris Weidman is a much better wrestler. He's much bigger. Weidman's always been a very big middleweight, extremely long with his punches, good combinations, excellent jab, good low kicks, good movement, and generally higher fight IQ with moments of brain farts. So I'm going to go with Chris Weidman here by decision. I think he outpoints Eryk Anders in the stand-up, takes him down, lands some ground and pound, goes for submissions. A good performance from Weidman. And then we go to the featured prelim fight between Jonathan Martinez versus Marcus McGhee. This is the sleeper of the card. One of the dark horses of the bantamweight division versus a future bantamweight contender. But Marcus McGhee started MMA very, very late. I mean, he's 34 years old already. The guy made his MMA professional debut in 2020. He was 30 years old about. And the bummer thing about that is he's so good. His striking is excellent. The combinations are well put together. The footwork is excellent. The foot placement for his shots, tremendous power in his punches, and as good with his precision. He has some of the best eyes when it comes to striking in the bantamweight division. So I don't know if we're ever going to see him fight for the belt, even if he keeps winning. That's the crazy part about that. I think he's way too old to fight for a belt. If he beats Jonathan Martinez, he's going to be ranked in the top 15 because Martinez is in the top 15. But McGhee has no other choice but to climb the rankings as quickly as possible. Bro's already fighting for a top 15 spot in his 10th professional fight. But it's not going to be an easy fight. Jonathan Martinez is a good striker. He has excellent kicks, which is the main thing about his striking, right? Very good low kicks, conditions for body and head kicks. Extremely powerful and durable as well. I mean, he ate some of Jose Aldo's best shots, but I don't know if he could take the same kind of punches from Marcus McGhee, right? Martinez's boxing isn't on the level of McGhee's, in my opinion. He's a better kicker, but as soon as McGhee enters in boxing range, Jonathan Martinez can get rocked. He's either going to clinch up or back away in a straight line like he usually does, and then look for a low kick after. But Marcus McGhee needs to stay in Jonathan Martinez's face the entire fight. Martinez has a decent jab, but generally his punches aren't the best thing about his striking, you know? McGhee excels in that area way more than Jonathan Martinez does. So from range, Martinez should win. In close boxing range, Marcus McGhee should dominate. So it's a tough fight to call. I think it's a competitive fight, but I'm going to go with Marcus McGhee to win by a third round TKO. You do not want to miss the Martinez and McGhee fight. And then we go to the main card, starting with Mauricio Ruffy, who's going to be opening up the pay-per-view card in his second UFC fight, fighting nerds doing big things in the UFC, man. And he's going up against James Llontop from Peru. His nickname is Goku, but he's on a 2-fight loss streak. Definitely change that nickname. No fighter named Goku is going to be on a loss streak. Mauricio Ruffy is nicknamed One Shot. He hasn't one-shot a lot of his opponents lately. Jimmy Malarkey has a weak chin and he couldn't one-shot him. So I'm not going to say Mauricio Ruffy doesn't hit hard. Of course he hits hard. But I think his power is a little bit exaggerated, right? He doesn't hit like Carlos does. Carlos has ridiculous power. Mauricio Ruffy just hits hard. Mauricio Ruffy's going to put on the performance of the night. This is going to look like a jackrabbit versus a snail. Mauricio Ruffy is so much faster than Llontop and way better of a striker. He's more technical. He's better with distance management. He's better with combinations. Even though he doesn't throw that many combinations, he could and still win that way. Because Llontop, he's also kind of a one-shot guy at times. That was shown in his Borshev fight. He has a decent jab, a 1-2, but very, very slow compared to Ruffy. And a lot more one-dimensional with some of his boxing. Mauricio Ruffy kind of fights like Conor, a little bit more flashy with his offense and defense. He has very good shoulder rolling. One of the few fighters in the sport that reliably shoulder rolls on punches. It does get his hands to drop, and sometimes he'll move in straight lines, which did get him knocked out one time, but he's gotten much better ever since. He has good takedown defense, creative, flashy takedowns like the distance scissor sweep. You don't see a lot of fighters take down their opponents with scissor sweeps from distance like that. Usually they're a lot closer. Mauricio Ruffy was like 5 feet away from his opponent and scissor swept him, which is insane. He has excellent counter right hands, just like Conor, but from the opposite stance. Elite distance management, good high kicks, spinning attacks, flying knees, a very good jab. Mauricio Ruffy is going to absolutely dominate Llontop, in my opinion. And I think he's one of the better lightweights, man. I think he's going to be maybe top 5 lightweights in the future. And he's over a 7-1 favor for a reason. And you might be asking, why is Mauricio Ruffy fighting someone like James Llontop after he just destroyed Jamie Malarkey, who is essentially a better fighter than Llontop is? No one wants to fight Ruffy. He said it himself. He's been trying to fight, but nobody wants to fight him, which is understandable. Who would want to fight this guy in his second UFC fight? But the fighting nerds, man, a lot of fighters do not want to fight them. Even John Silva right now is saying that nobody, like, he wants to fight, but nobody wants to fight him. He's willing to fight in 2 different weight classes just to open up the pool of fighters that are willing to fight against him. So respect to Llontop for taking the fight, but it's going to be most likely a one-sided domination, a performance of the night for Mauricio Ruffy. And then we go to Karine Silva versus Viviane Araujo. I don't know why this is on the main card. How is Chris Weidman versus Eryk Anders not on the main card, but this fight is? Or even Jim Miller. Or even Marcin Tybura's fight. Oban Elliott versus Basil Hafiz should be on the main card over that fight. Why is Karine Silva versus Viviane Araujo on the main card? No disrespect to them, but when you look at the fighters below on the prelims, that's a bit of disrespect to those guys. They've been around a lot longer. There's more fans that would want to see them on the main card, but the fight might be decent. Karine Silva's on a 9-win streak, most of them finishes. She is well-rounded, able to knock our opponents and submit them as well, has good wrestling, good striking. Viviane Araujo is 1-3 in her last 4 fights, but all 3 of those losses were against some of the best. Natalia Silva beat her in the last fight, Amanda Ribas, and Alexa Grasso, who is now the former champion. The main difference between them two is the fact that Viviane Araujo is so much older. She's 37 years old as a flyweight, whereas Karine Silva is in the prime of her career, 30 years old, her 22nd professional fight, coming off very good wins against Caitlin Souza, Ariana Lipski, and if she can get this win against Viviane Araujo, she'll be very close to a top 10, and then maybe fight for a title in the future. Karine Silva is going to be the faster fighter of the two. She has extremely fast kicks. I mean, the combination she's throwing at Marina Moroz, the right front kick into a right low kick, is a swift combination you don't see from many fighters. And Viviane Araujo was not doing well against the speed of Natalia Silva, who is faster than Karine Silva as well, but able to land shots and move around is a big thing against Araujo, who's going to put a little bit more pressure against Karine Silva, but Silva's going to be able to fight against the strength of Araujo in the clinch, try to defend takedowns, go for takedowns against Araujo, landing jabs, front kicks, low kicks, eventually winning the fight by a decision, and maybe like 2 or 3 fights away from fighting for a title. And then we go to Bo Nickal versus Paul Craig. I have Bo Nickal winning. Sprawl and brawl. That's the best way he wins the fight. Do not fight Craig in his guard. Even though he's 17-8, has been knocked out by many fighters, do not let Paul Craig's losses deceive you. He is one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters from middleweight to heavyweight. He has insanely dangerous submissions in his guard. One of the best triangle chokes we've ever seen in the sport. Very good armbar, and hard to just escape his guard without ground and pounding him, right? Without shattering that chin, because Paul Craig doesn't have a great chin. And Bo Nickal doesn't even need to go to the ground. He can just stop all the takedowns from Paul Craig. Do not clinch up with him where he can pull guard, because he will do that. Stay at range and explode with punches, kind of similar to what Kyle Barallo did. Blitzing Paul Craig with punches is the best way to beat him by knockout. So I have Bo Nickal knocking out Paul Craig by keeping the fight standing, but that's going to require him to show some fight IQ. Do not fight Paul Craig where he is at his best. He doesn't have great takedowns, especially enough to beat someone like Bo Nickal, right? He's not taking down Bo Nickal. If he takes down Bo Nickal, the hype is not real, right? He should not be getting taken down by someone like Paul Craig. Bo Nickal is hyped as being one of the best wrestlers the sport has ever seen. He's very explosive. He's not even in his prime yet, but he's very physically strong, fast, athletic. He's got punching power and getting better with his boxing and movement. I'm going to go with Bo Nickal by a second round TKO, defending all the takedowns and lighting up Paul Craig with his hands, knocking him out and getting maybe a performance bonus. And then we go to the featured fights of the card. The co-main event, which is a 5-round fight, Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler 2, the rematch. This is not a fight I am confident in one way or the other. Even though Charles Oliveira is over a 2-1 favorite due to the fact that he beat him before and has gotten better ever since. Michael Chandler, has he gotten better? He could. It's just some of his fights, he didn't show high fight IQ. If he had a little bit more composure with his fighting style, not expending all of his energy in the first round, didn't always fight to just put on a show for the fans, which is great. You know, we all thank him for that. We all respect Michael Chandler for always being so entertaining, but for him to win, right, his best chances of just winning the fight, if he stayed a bit more technical, he can beat these top guys. He can beat Charles Oliveira. He can beat Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. Like, he can get these wins. I'm not saying I would favor him against these guys, but he has so much of a better chance of beating these guys if he just fought smarter, right? Which he can do, where we've seen Michael Chandler fight smart before. Look at the way he fought Dan Hooker. In the UFC, Michael Chandler's never fought that good before. That was the best technical performance from Michael Chandler we've ever seen. It was nearly flawless. He didn't just brawl and explode with combinations on Dan Hooker. He was looking for the opening, went to the body shots, conditioned that off of a left hook to the head as Dan Hooker dropped his hands, where he was landing leg kicks on Chandler, knowing that Dan Hooker's game plan of leg is going to cause him to move around and back away from Chandler throughout the fight. It was an excellent performance, and we've seen those kind of performances in Bellator before, like when he fought Benson Henderson for an example. But after the Dan Hooker fight, he went right into a title fight with Charles Oliveira, and he knew he had to put on the show from there on out, which gave him the Conor McGregor fight. It worked until the fight just didn't happen. But if he learned from the first fight with Oliveira, I can see him winning. Now, Charles has gotten a lot better. His boxing has improved. His head movement is a little bit better. His grappling can work. It's going to depend on Michael Chandler over explodes with his takedowns and falls into some kind of submission. Chandler's style has to be sprawl and brawl, right? Do not go to the ground with Oliveira unless you rock and drop him first, just like he did in the first fight. Everything needs to be in the stand-up. Bounce linearly, connect with a few fast jabs just to get the rhythm and the distance down. Oliveira's going to be moving forward. These are both fighters who do not want to back up, right? These are both heavy pressure fighters. And just like I showed in the first fight, it was nearly equal. They were in the center of the cage because they both wanted to push each other back. When two driving forces who only know how to move forward clash against each other, there tends to be a standstill. That's what happened in the first fight. But Chandler can move a little bit back just to land the jab and look for a counter overhand, right straight, or left hook to knock out Charles Oliveira. But for Oliveira, I think his jab is also going to be very important for this fight to keep Chandler honest from distance. That's going to allow him to dictate whenever Chandler wants to explode for his power punches, blow with his power punches. If Oliveira's not throwing out jabs, he's causing 50-50 scenarios with every striking exchange. He's raising the risk of both fighters getting knocked out, which is going to be extremely suspenseful throughout the fight. But if he fights off of his jab, the fight turns into his favors quickly in the fight, and he needs to land low kicks whenever Chandler's in an idle stance, moving forward and back, slow down the movement, which is also going to slow down the explosive blitzes out of Chandler, and know that Chandler usually only throws when he's moving forward. If Chandler's moving backwards, he tends not to throw punches as much. That's why Chandler got knocked out. That's why Chandler got dropped in the first Oliveira fight when he backed away. Oliveira, on the other hand, will also throw punches moving backwards, just like he did against Jared Gordon. So if Oliveira's landing the jab and low kick, Chandler's going to be backing up in the fight, which is going to open up potential left hooks for Oliveira to drop him yet again. So my prediction for this fight, it's very close. The odds say Oliveira is a moderate favorite. I think it's close to a pick'em. Chandler talked about that he's learned a lot from the first Oliveira fight. He said even though he's not new to the sport, he felt like he was new when he fought Oliveira, right? It was a second UFC fight, and he knows exactly what he needs to do to beat Oliveira in the rematch. And as they say, you learn a lot more from your losses than you do your wins. Chandler probably learned a lot more from the Oliveira fight than Oliveira did, which makes the fight nearly 50-50 in my opinion. So if I lean one way or the other, I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira. And I think he's going to win the fight by a second round submission after dropping Chandler. So whatever Chandler is saying he's gotten better at, even in his last fight against Justin Gaethje, which was a few years ago, he still has the same kind of exits from the striking exchanges. The same kind of exits that he got dropped by Charles Oliveira for. When he backs out of exchanges, he has chin up in the air, hands down, and just leans away. Charles Oliveira is one of the best at capitalizing on those kind of moments, like he did against Justin Gaethje as well. He's dropped multiple opponents while they were exiting away from the striking. He's an absolute sniper in the stand-up. He's gotten a much better guard too, blocking punches much better than ever before, and I think he can absorb one of Chandler's shots on the guard. Chandler exits away as Oliveira steps forward and connects with a big shot, dropping Chandler and then finishing him with a choke. So I'm going to go Charles Oliveira by a second round submission, but I can see a TKO as well. And then we go to the main event. The heavyweight champion, the greatest light heavyweight of all time, pound for pound, best fighter we've ever seen in the sport, Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic, as they used to call him. The greatest heavyweight of all time, but 42 years old. Jones is not that young either, though. You know, Jones is 37. If we're going to be honest, Jones doesn't look like he's in his prime anymore. In his last fight against Ciryl Gane, he looked much slower, but that is given going up to the heavyweight division. But his striking didn't look as good either. But that could also be because he was fighting Ciryl Gane, the best heavyweight striker, arguably, of all time, who has really good movement in order to get Jon Jones to miss his punches the way he did. But here's the thing, man. If this fight was both fighters in their prime, it would be amazing. Barn-burning fight, competitive. I can see how Stipe, at his best, could beat Jon Jones. But I could also see Jon Jones being Stipe. Both fighters are roughly around the same size. Jon Jones is saying he walks around at 235 pounds right now. Looks like he lowered his weight against a smaller heavyweight, because Stipe, in his last fight against Francis Ngannou, weighed 234 pounds, which is lighter than Jon Jones right now. But maybe Stipe weighs in heavier. Who knows? It looks like both fighters are training for a faster opponent. Therefore, upping their speed, not much their strength and weight. And it could potentially go multiple rounds, right? I don't think it's going to be a first round finish from either fighter. And I think both fighters are also expecting the same. Even though Stipe most likely is not in his prime anymore, he's still a veteran. He still has the skills that he's used throughout his entire career. And Jon Jones is not a knockout artist, usually, right? He doesn't have a lot of knockouts. If he knocks out Stipe early, that's a different thing, right? It could be for multiple different reasons. Like maybe Jones is a lot more powerful at heavyweight, but Stipe is probably a lot older and can't take the same kind of shots like he used to. I think the fight is going to go maybe third roundish until Jon Jones finishes Stipe. I think Jones is going to show a little bit more respect in front of his opponent, not underestimating him. He's probably preparing for the best version of Stipe. Jon Jones is going to finish Stipe, I think. I think he's going to be much faster with his movement and his wrestling. I think he's going to time a shot under some of Stipe's punches, or maybe push Stipe up against the fence using his kicks, posting on the hands, extending his fingers into the eyes. Of course, they're not going to ruin this fight with an eye poke. You know, Jones could probably get a few eye pokes in there, shoot a takedown, drag the fight to the ground, and then maybe get his back for rear naked choke, finishing the fight in the third round. I think the low kicks and the jabs are going to be the main thing for Jones here, and ultimately just waiting for Stipe to throw his right hand so he can counter that with a takedown or a spinning elbow. So yeah, Jon Jones wins, as he absolutely should. He's the second biggest favorite on the card. He's almost a 7-1 favorite. He should absolutely dominate this fight. But if immigrant mentality Stipe Miocic shows up, it's over for Jon Jones. It's over. Stipe with his pivoting punches, boxing combinations, left hook to the liver, bread baskets, and chopping legs with kicks. Jones doesn't have good leg kicking defense, using the range to get by the post and retreat defense of Jon Jones. Stipe absolutely can win this fight, but I hope like that version of Stipe actually fights, you know. I hope he's not over the hill. It'd be great to see him still in his best, but at 42 years old, off a knockout loss, 3 years not fighting, it's not likely. But we have seen it before, right? Glover did become champ. Randy Couture, who was even older than Stipe and has been through wars, right? That guy took a lot of damage throughout his career before he beat Tim Sylvia. But Jon Jones ain't Tim Sylvia, so it's going to be way harder for Stipe. But I hope it's a good fight, man. I really do. Even though, you know, there has been a lot of complaints that the fight should have been with Tom Aspinall. The fight is still happening, and we all hope that the fight is going to be good at the end of the day, you know? We're all tuning in to watch the fight, and hopefully the fight's not as one-sided as the betting odds are saying, because if Jones dominates the fight, it makes it look easy, and Stipe doesn't look the same. Like, all the criticism, all the complaints are going to be true. If Stipe somehow performs well, it's going to do one of two things. It's either going to show that Stipe is better than most people expected, or it's that Jon Jones has declined. It's one of those two. You know, if Stipe is still a great fighter who can contend with some of the best heavyweights, that'd be amazing for the weight class, because he did say after that he might stay around and fight other fighters. But the latter would be not great. It would like validate the whole thing about him ducking Tom Aspinall, that he knew that Aspinall would beat him, because if an old Stipe is doing well against Jon Jones, imagine what Tom Aspinall would do in the prime of his fighting abilities. So at the end of the day, I think Jon Jones is going to dominate. You don't usually see 42-year-old fighters, legends, ever perform the same after a knockout loss, and especially after a long hiatus from that knockout loss. So I hope Stipe shows up, man. I hope he performs above expectations in that fight, man, because that would be such a bummer if it's just a Jon Jones one-sided beatdown like everyone thinks it's going to be. And for any bettors out there, let's look at these betting odds. Let's look at the odds here. So Jon Jones, lock of the card, most likely is going to win the fight. I would not bet on Charles Oliveira. In fact, if I were to bet either on Oliveira or Chandler, I'd probably go with Chandler because he is a plus 200. Bo Nickal, he's a lock of the card. But it doesn't hurt to put a little bit on Paul Craig, in my opinion. He can always pull off a triangle choke if Bo Nickal doesn't have high fight IQ, but with the level of wrestler that he was, he's most likely going to put on an intelligent performance. I think Karine Silva is also a fighter to bet on as well. Mauricio Ruffy, I'm confident he'll win as well. I would avoid the Martinez and McGhee fight. It's way too close. I would probably bet on Chris Weidman. He's a slight underdog. Jim Miller's an underdog against Damon Jackson, but I would not bet on that fight. I would avoid the Deborah and Denise fight as well. Heavyweights, you know, hard to really tell who's going to win some of those, especially at the lower end of the top 15. I would also avoid the Mickey Gall and Ramiz Brahimaj fight. It's way too close. Either fighter can win. I think Oban Elliott should beat Basil Hafiz, but I don't like the odds for Oban Elliott. So if you want a dog of the card that has the best chance of delivering good returns, it's probably Basil Hafiz. The fight is very close. I make it much closer to a pick'em than they have it. And I would also avoid the Veronica Hardy and Eduarda Moura fight. So those are my opinions on the betting odds of the card. So I hope you guys enjoyed the predictions, and if you guys did, make sure to give the video a like, make sure to subscribe with the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.